a gem. It is something like I've never seen in Arizona. I couldn't believe it when I first laid eyes on it.
For thousands of years, a creek in the Arizona desert was quietly doing something that rivers almost never do. It was building itself. Every single day, it laid down 10 to 13 tons of brand new limestone. It carved turquoise pools out of ancient rock. It fed an ecosystem so rich and so improbable that visitors who stumbled upon it assumed they had somehow crossed into the wrong continent. And it did all of this while pumping 20,000 gallons of spring water every minute through one of the driest landscapes in North America. Then, in 1909, engineers took almost all of that water away. For the next 96 years, one of the rarest ecosystems on Earth slowly stopped being itself. The pools shrank. The limestone stopped growing. The native fish retreated into fragments of what had once been their entire world. And when Arizona finally shut down the dam that had stolen the creek's flow, what happened next shocked the scientists who had devoted years to studying it. This is the story of a river that forgot itself and then remembered. The dramatic escarpment that divides Arizona's high plateau from its desert lowlands release approximately 20,000 gallons of crystal clear water every single minute, maintaining a constant temperature between 70 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year. That consistency is the key to everything. The flow barely changes between drought years and wet years because the water feeding it isn't recent rainfall. Hydrogeologists believe the water emerging at fossil springs began its journey decades or even centuries ago, slowly percolating through fractured limestone deep underground. The moon rim acts as a massive natural sponge, absorbing precipitation over a vast area and releasing it through these springs at a rate so steady it borders on mechanical. But the water carries something else when it arrives. It is saturated with dissolved calcium carbonate, mineral content acquired during its long underground journey. When that mineral-laden water reaches the surface and tumbles over rocks and fallen logs, carbon dioxide escapes into the open air. As it does, the dissolved calcium carbonate can no longer stay in solution. It hardens, coats whatever it touches. It builds. Scientists call this material travertine, a form of limestone deposited by flowing water rather than ancient seabeds. Most rivers spend their existence carving landscapes down. Fossil Creek does the opposite. It constructs terraces, natural dams, waterfalls, and the luminous blue-green pools that have become its signature. The coloration itself comes from light refracting through minerals saturated water of exceptional clarity. The rock feeding this process carries a story going back further than most people can comfortably imagine. The limestone was originally deposited between 300 and 340 million years ago during the Permian period when much of present-day Arizona lay submerged beneath a warm, shallow tropical sea. Every calcium ion moving through Fossil Creek began as the shell or skeleton of a marine organism that lived and died before the first dinosaurs evolved. Each new travertine terrace forming today is recycled material from an ocean that disappeared hundreds of millions of years before modern Arizona existed. This ancient geological inheritance also explains how the creek acquired its misleading name. Early explorers encountered branches, leaves, and stones encased in pale limestone, convincingly resembling petrified fossils. In reality, nothing had fossilized. Smelters ran day and night, and the new electrical machinery promising to replace steam power demanded one thing above all else: a reliable electricity supply. Phoenix was expanding. Jerome's operations were consuming staggering amounts of energy. Engineers and investors were searching the landscape for opportunities. A man named Lou Turner found one in 1900. Turner filed a water claim on Fossil Creek. His thinking represented the dominant philosophy of the era. Flowing water that disappeared into the desert without performing work was wasted potential. What Turner saw was hydroelectric power. Fossil Creek's consistent flow, combined with the canyon's dramatic elevation drop, nearly 1,600 feet, meant relatively modest engineering could produce significant electrical generation. Gravity would do most of the work. The challenge was immense. There was no road to the site. The nearest railroad lay more than 40 m away, separated from Fossil Creek by mountains, cliffs, and unbroken desert terrain. Historical accounts describe more than 600 workers, approximately 400 mules, and over 150 wagons moving cement, steel, timber, turbines, and machinery across terrain that had never supported industrial traffic. Many of the laborers were Apache and Mojave workers whose knowledge of Arizona's geography proved invaluable. The work came at a brutal human cost. Extreme heat, primitive conditions, and steep grades claimed workers and pack animals before construction construction was complete. The total investment came to approximately $1.5 million, tens of millions in today's terms. On June 21, 1909, the Childs Power Plant entered service. Named after S.W. Childs, a New York bondbroker whose backing made it possible. Engineers used a 25-foot diversion dam to capture nearly the creek's entire flow before sending it through 8,800 feet of wooden flumes, then down pentocks that dropped the water hundreds of feet onto turbines below. Gravity, not storage, generated the power. The Irving Power Plant followed between 1915 and 1916, expanding the system further. The transformation was rapid. By 1920, the Childs and Irving stations were producing roughly 70% of Phoenix's electricity, a city whose population had nearly doubled in a decade. Streetlights, electric streetcars, mining equipment, and a growing urban center all ran on power from a remote desert canyon more than 100 miles away. The achievement was recognized in 1976 when the American Society of Mechanical Engineers designated the project a historic mechanical engineering landmark. Arizona Public Service, which now owned the system, would need to secure a new license from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, requiring extensive environmental studies, potential modernization, and millions in compliance costs. The numbers no longer made sense. At the same time, the scientific case for what the creek represented had been building steadily. Fossil Creek was one of the largest active travertine systems in the United States, a biological oasis hosting rare desert fish, intact riparian forests, and hundreds of wildlife species. Organizations including the Center for Biological Diversity, American Rivers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Arizona Game and Fish Department argued that diverting nearly the creek's entire flow made little ecological sense when the hydroelectric project had become economically marginal. In 1999, Arizona Public Service voluntarily agreed to decommission the Childs-Irving project and restore Fossil Creek's natural flow. No court ordered it, though federal agency had condemned the facilities. A PS concluded on its own that restoring the river offered greater long-term value than preserving infrastructure whose best days were behind it. In the American Southwest, where water rights are governed by the doctrine of prior appropriation, the principle that whoever first put water to beneficial use holds the senior right to it, voluntarily relinquishing an established diversion was almost without precedent. The decision carried a substantial price tag. Decommissioning, removing portions of the diversion infrastructure, restoring the stream channel, and preparing the ecosystem for recovered flow ultimately cost approximately $13 million. Critics questioned whether spending that much made sense for obscure native fish with no commercial value. Supporters responded that what was being protected wasn't a fish list. It was a geological and biological system found almost nowhere else on Earth. For the Yavapai Apache Nation, whose ancestral homeland had included this canyon long before any engineer arrived, the decision carried meaning that economics couldn't capture. A painful irony ran through the moment. Many Yavapai and Apache men had been among the laborers who built the original diversion in 1908 and 1909. The dam that had altered their ancestral landscape for nearly a century had been constructed partly by members of the community whose land it occupied. At the shutdown ceremony, tribal historian and Councilman Vincent Randall acknowledged that complicated history. His people had been proud to help build the dam because it represented opportunity in its time. But time had changed what was right. He offered a prayer asking the creek for forgiveness. Restoring the water, however, would not automatically restore the ecosystem. 96 years of altered flow had fundamentally changed the creek. The challenge ahead was unlike anything previously attempted. Scientists bet against 100 red years of damage. The years between APS's 1999 commitment and the actual restoration gave scientists something they almost never have before a major ecological intervention. Time to prepare. Most dam removal projects proceed reactively. The structure comes down and researchers scramble to document what changes. Fossil Creek offered advanced warning. Ecologists used that window to build the most detailed pre-restoration scientific baseline any comparable project had produced. Leading the effort was Dr. Jane C. Marks, a stream ecologist at Northern Arizona University, whose research focused on how rivers function as integrated systems. Marks recognized immediately that Fossil Creek wasn't just a restoration opportunity. It was a scientific experiment on a scale that would never be deliberately designed. A full before and after study of what happens when an ecosystem's fundamental process is returned after nearly a century of interruption. Her team measured everything: water chemistry at dozens of points, nutrient cycling rates, photosynthesis levels in aquatic plant communities, aquatic insect populations, the mayflies, caddisflies, and stoneflies that form the foundational layer of a healthy stream food web. Fish populations in both the degraded downstream sections and the healthy upstream reaches above the diversion, which served as the ecological control group, a picture of what the lower creek should have looked like all along. What those upstream reaches showed was both a reference point and a rebuke. Above the dam, the creek functioned as a fully intact travertine system with dense native fish populations and rich aquatic insect communities. A few hundred yards below, the same springs produced a diminished ghost of what they were capable of. Before restoration could begin, there was a biological problem threatening to turn the project into an expensive failure. 96 years of altered habitat had allowed invasive fish, largemouth bass, green sunfish, and other introduced predators to establish themselves downstream. Simply returning full flow without addressing them would expand habitat for invaders, potentially overwhelming native fish before they could recover. In the fall of 2004, nearly 100 biologists, fisheries specialists, students, volunteers, and agency personnel conducted one of Arizona's largest coordinated native fish recovery operations. Teams systematically removed non-native fish from the restoration reach while simultaneously constructing a permanent barrier to prevent their return. On June 18, 2005, Arizona Public Service shut off the flow entering the hydroelectric dry stream banks darkened with returning moisture. Scientists, managers, tribal representatives, and local residents gathered to witness the moment. They were cautiously hopeful. Damaged ecosystems typically recover slowly, often taking decades to stabilize. Most expected Fossil Creek to follow the same gradual path. What happened instead rewrote what the science thought it knew. What the desert river did next shocked even the scientists. The first surprises were invisible. Dr. Marks and her colleagues had spent years measuring Fossil Creek's metabolic function. The rate of photosynthesis, nutrient processing efficiency, the activity of microbial and algal communities at the base of the food web. When they analyzed the first post-restoration results, they found something that contradicted the standard model of ecosystem recovery. The creek wasn't behaving like a damaged system struggling back toward health. It was behaving like a system that had simply been switched back on. Photosynthesis rates increased rapidly in the weeks following restoration. Nutrient cycling rebounded toward levels measured in the healthy upstream reaches. The fundamental biochemistry of a functioning river restarted with a speed that stunned researchers expecting years of gradual recovery. Marks described the central lesson in terms now quoted throughout ecological literature. Water, she concluded, was the master variable. Restore it and the ecosystem's most important processes restore themselves. Then came geology. Within weeks, researchers observed the ancient travertine machinery restart. New limestone began coating rocks, fallen branches, and stream beds along the restored reach. Over the following years, scientists documented entirely new limestone dams forming along roughly 6 m of previously deprived channel, some structures growing more than 2 centimeters per year. They were watching a waterfall build itself in real time. The fish responded with numbers that seemed almost impossible to believe. The Sonora sucker increased by approximately 17 times. Desert suckers expanded by roughly 52-fold. The round-tailed chub, which had nearly vanished from much of its Arizona range, rebounded by around 70 times. And then there was the speckled dace, a small native minnow reduced to near local extinction in the degraded creek. Within a few years, its population had increased by approximately 150-fold, roughly 15,000%. Species on the edge of disappearing suddenly became among the most abundant fish in the canyon. The recovery moved in precisely the sequence ecological theory predicted but rarely gets to observe. Microbial communities and algae recovered first, rebuilding the photosynthetic base. Aquatic insects followed. Mayflies, caddisflies, dragonflies, restoring the middle food web layer. Fish expanded as prey rebounded. Then larger predators arrived. Reptiles, wading birds, mammals. Ecologists call this bottom-up recovery. Fossil Creek produced a textbook demonstration at a speed the literature had not anticipated. The broader wildlife recovery confirmed the pattern. Surveys now document nearly 200 vertebrate species using the canyon. The endangered southwestern willow flycatcher returned to recovering cottonwood and willow habitat. The common black hawk came back to hunt fish and frogs along restored stream corridors. Black bears visited during Arizona's hottest summers. The sonar and mud turtle reestablished populations along the restored reach. Perhaps the greatest achievement wasn't the return of any single species, but the exclusion of others. Thanks to the 2004 removal effort and permanent fish barrier, Fossil Creek eventually became Arizona's longest stream reach, containing a native fish community entirely free of non-native species, a distinction almost unheard of anywhere in the American West, where introduced bass, trout, and sunfish now dominate rivers that evolved without them. The scientific implications reached far beyond Arizona. For decades, restoration ecology had assumed heavily altered ecosystems required generations to recover. Fossil Creek challenged that assumption with hard data collected before, during, and after restoration, demonstrating not just that recovery occurred, but precisely how fast and in what sequence. Around the world, ecologists now cite it as one of the clearest demonstrations that restoring an ecosystem's most fundamental process can produce boasts recovery speeds that surprise even the professionals who study it. The river won. Now humans are the biggest threat again. On March 30th, 2009, just 4 years after the water returned, the Omnibus Public Land Management Act designated 16.88 miles of Fossil Creek as part of the National Wild and Scenic River System. The designation recognized the creek's geological, ecological, scenic, recreational, and cultural values, and legally protected it from future dams and major development, making it only Arizona's second wild and scenic river, joining the Verde River. The irony is that this recognition immediately created the next threat. Before the restoration, reaching Fossil Creek required navigating long miles of rough forest roads. Very few people made the journey. Then the photographs started circulating. Travel writers, outdoor magazines, and social media discovered the turquoise pools. Thousands of visitors arrived, then tens of thousands. Parking areas filled to capacity. People waded into travertine formations, camped illegally, lit fires in restricted zones, and created informal trails throughout the recovering ecosystem. Fragile riparian vegetation, rebuilding for only a few years, was repeatedly trampled. Stream banks eroded under thousands of footsteps. Litter accumulated in places untouched since the diversion was removed. Dr. Marks described the situation with a sentence that has become inseparable from Fossil Creek's story. "We have this fear that we are going to love it to death." It wasn't an exaggeration. The ecosystem had recovered because it was given space to function naturally. Uncontrolled recreation threatened to disrupt those same processes through a different mechanism than a diversion dam, but with potentially comparable consequences. Land managers responded before the damage became irreversible. The U.S. Forest Service implemented a seasonal permit and reservation system during peak months. Visitors must reserve parking in advance with daily vehicle numbers strictly capped. Rangers patrol regularly, enforce restrictions, prohibit overnight camping in sensitive zones, and educate visitors about the fragility of the travertine formations and surrounding habitat. The goal is not exclusion. It's ensuring that enthusiasm for one of Arizona's most remarkable places doesn't inadvertently erase what makes it remarkable. What Fossil Creek taught the world. The story of Fossil Creek did not end when the water came back. It expanded. Since the restoration, the United States has removed more than 2,000 dams. According to American Rivers, as aging infrastructure, changing economics, and evolving ecological understanding have transformed how the country thinks about rivers. Landmark projects on Washington's Elwes River, Maine's Penobscot River, and California's Klamath River have demonstrated that removing obsolete dams can reopen fish migration routes, restore wetlands, improve water quality, and revive ecosystems once considered permanently altered. Fossil Creek remains one of the clearest early demonstrations because the science was so thorough. Researchers continue working in the canyon studying travertine formation rates, groundwater chemistry, fish genetics, and nutrient cycling. The data accumulated before, during, and after restoration represents a record of ecological recovery that most comparable projects cannot approach. The broader lesson is one that challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that human-altered ecosystems are broken in ways that cannot be reversed on human timescales. What Fossil Creek showed with data at every stage is that many ecosystems are not destroyed by industrial development. They are suppressed. Restore the fundamental process they depend on, and recovery can be faster and more complete than almost anyone predicted. In 1909, the workers who built the Childs Power Plant believed they were writing Arizona's future. In a real sense, they were. That electricity helped electrify Phoenix, powered Jerome's copper mines, and built the infrastructure around which the modern Southwest assembled itself. But history revealed something those engineers could not have imagined. The greatest engineering achievement associated with Fossil Creek was not the concrete diversion dam they built in a year of extraordinary effort. It was the river itself, fed by groundwater traveling underground for decades, carrying minerals formed in a tropical sea 300 million years ago, building limestone waterfalls one molecule at a time, recovering its native fish populations within years of restoration, and rebuilding an entire ecosystem almost as soon as the humans who had interrupted it stepped aside. Some things, it turns out, are more powerful than the structures built to contain them. Did this story change how you think about rivers, restoration, and what nature is capable of when given the chance? If it did, like and subscribe, because the stories of places that heal themselves are some of the most important ones we can.